color, as long as you are true fella, as long as you are real fella. All the people of different races with different lives in different places. It doesn't matter what your name is. We got to have lots of changes. We need more brothers if we're to make it. We need more sisters if we're to save it. Are you the one who's gonna stand up and be counted? Are you the one who's gonna be there when we shout it? Are you the one who's always ready with a helping hand? Are you the one who understands this family plan? Black fella, white fella, yellow fella, any fella, it doesn't matter what you color, as long as you are true fella. All the people.
Yes, yeah, that's the easiest way.
Good morning and welcome. We'd love to just really thank you for coming to join us today for this special event. We're just going to start in a minute. If people would like to come in and find a place to sit. I know there's still some people arriving. So yeah, we'll start in just a minute. Good morning again. If you'd like to come in and take a seat, we've been blessed with a very lovely weather this morning. Not too hot compared to some of the last days, I believe. My name is Rod Thorpe. I'm one of the leaders down at Youth of the Mission Canberra, and I'm a little bit newer on the scene. My wife and I were living overseas for many years, but we've been very keen to engage with this whole process as we've come back. So it's a great blessing to be with you. Just a couple of notices as we start. Sometimes we need to find toilets, and if you do, they're up here in the visitor centre. The men are off to the left-hand side, the women off to the right-hand side. Also, we just need to advise that in the event of a bushfire, not quite so likely today, but just in case, we need to meet down at the water's edge. There's a meeting point, and the national parks people will look after us from there as to how to evacuate from the site. You're welcome to stay after this event and stay in the national park, but just beware that the gates do close at 7 p.m. And if you are still in here at 7 p.m., then I think you come back tomorrow to get your car. Or you just sleep the night, one or the other. But we're fine to stay here until 7. Up the back, there's a help team, and so if you need anything, they are very willing and able to help you. Anybody who's got a lanyard with a blue ribbon, they're probably help team unless they stole a blue ribbon from somewhere else. They're very willing to help you with anything you need. Just over to the left there, we have the first aid table. So if you have need of that, we have some great people ready to help. I was actually able to put them to work first thing this morning by smacking myself in the face with a gazebo. And I can actually let you know that they are very proficient. And I'd probably advise, don't smack yourself in the face with a gazebo. It hurts. So. Okay. The first thing I'd like to do is to welcome Lindsay McDowell. Of course, we have Lindsay and Anne here who have been working on this whole process, event, this thing that the Lord has really called together for many, many years. And so I'd just like to invite Lindsay to come and to share with us. Annie Barbara first. Yes, okay, sorry. Lindsay's next. Annie Barbara is coming first. Sorry, Annie Barbara, to welcome us. Oh, yeah, sure.
Thank you very much.
Lovely. Good job.
Thanks, Rod. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning to you all, and welcome to each and every one of you that are here this morning. It's a great occasion that we're being faced with this morning, and to be welcomed on the land of the Gweagal people, my father's people. I'm a Gweagal woman as well, from La Perouse, so my strong connections are here. This is where it all started, the shoreline, and it was uncanny you were saying before, if it rains or anything should happen, go down to the water's edge. My people that were here then in 1770, first, they didn't feel comfortable down by the water's edge. What had happened to the people, and now it happened, and a process. So today is a milestone in what we do as a people, when we can come together and reflect and think about historical events and what had happened in 1770. From my elders, both past, present and emerging, where our young ones will take the reins. Our young ones will take us into the new millennium, to the new centuries. They will show us, guide us, and teach us how things need to be done and why they need to be done, how they're done properly, and we work together in harmony and in unity. Uncle Ozzy, I see you in the front. I welcome you as well. Pastor Ray Minicon, we have a long association, you and I, and the journeys you two men have travelled up and down the coast is valuable, is reminisce, and you also connect to my community, La Perouse, and the South Coast. So it's wonderful to see so many people here. When we travel around this great country of ours, there is no other country in the world like this country, Australia. Otherwise, people wouldn't be migrating here, would they? And those ships wouldn't have came here either, would they? And then if I look on the shoreline over at La Perouse, where my first foreign language was French, a language imposed on us by the Frenchmen that sailed in there that morning. I remember having to march down from La Perouse Primary School and sing fluently the national anthem in French. And if you weren't singing it, you'd be poked in the back and prodded. Why aren't you singing? Well, it's not my anthem, so why should I be singing it? So we enjoyed this for years, doing this, singing this national anthem. And if I come across the way a little bit to where they're doing the new wharf, we have a monument there. To read the monument, you've got to get on your hands and knees to read it. When I spoke to council on Wednesday night and moved 3 motions, I talked about this monument, having to read it on your hands and knees. It can fit into the big museum monument how many millions and millions of times, and I said this to them, you need to start looking and reflecting on First Nations people here and look at some monuments for us. We have nothing in La Perouse that talks about the Sims family. We have a timber reserve, 2 families occupied here in La Perouse, the Sims timber families. Their men worked in harmony and in unity with the land. Our women nurtured, created, birthed. And your men, you help produce as well. So we women would be lost without you. So it's a partnership we have that goes hand in hand, hand in glove. We can't do it by ourselves. You can't do it by yourself. Certainly you can't. So we need each other. We need each other to walk together with and in unity. And it can only happen in a way like this. Reverend Lindsay, the work you put into this, the tireless hours you worked with and hand, you gave unstintingly of your time. And I'm blessed for being a part of your life with you and walking a journey with you. I just wish more of our mob, my mob, could get up and say, we need to do this as a people. You set the paths, you clear the way, we just need to walk together with you. And at the end of the day, we're all going to want someone. And my mother reminded me once, she said, don't ever ask God to do this for you. If he can help you, he will. But don't ask him something that you want to achieve yourself. So I've lived by that. I've gained a lot of insight, and I've brought my children up to be good people, to follow, to listen, and to be guided. We are no experts, but we will learn as we go along, and we will learn to accept. Today is a moving day. It's a day where we need to reflect and say these things did happen, and we'll talk about these later on. But most of all, think where you are today, on the land of the Gweagal people, who had sought so many things here. They fought, they lived in harmony, and they lived a pristine lifestyle. Ladies and gentlemen, walk in unity, harmony and grace. May God bless you in each of your travels. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Auntie Barbara. Thank you. That was some wonderful insights. Thank you. Okay, Lindsay, we would love to have you come and to share with us. Thank you very much, Lindsay.
Yeah, Lindsay.
Yeah, clap for Lindsay.
I say it again. Thank you, Rod. And Auntie Barbara. Thank you. Your words, beauty of the heart, we heard just now. You touched me touched us all. You touched us all, and joy and gratitude fills my heart that I could find myself on a journey with someone as beautiful as you. Thank you so much. Before I spend a little while leading us into an account, truth-telling account, where we bring out into the open the truth about our shared history in the last 253 years. Before I go to that, I would like to invite two people to come forward, and that is Douglas Thomas and Lara Carestas. They are going to be leading us in very special moments this morning as we are taken by them speaking truth-telling declarations. And so I'm asking Doug and Lara to just come up here beside me. Doug has a couple of words that he would like to say. Important to have you know them, given the way they are going to be leading us through our truth-telling statements right through the program.
Thank you, Lindsay, and pay my respects to everyone who is here. Thank you, Auntie Barbara, for your words and introduction.
Speak right into the microphone, please. We have hearing impaired people.
Sure thing. How's that? Much better? Great. And credit to Lindsay for what you have done to bring us today. I am inspired by you, and I'm so glad to be standing by you. So a little about me so you understand why myself and Lara will be leading us today. Well, I'm a teacher and I'm a school principal. I love education and learning is my passion. I was a school student in 1970, and as a small boy, I recall watching the enactment of Cook's arrival. I was here with my mother and father, and we came to celebrate what I was told a wonderful moment in history. I was taught as a primary student that this happened peacefully and with the consent of the First Nations peoples. I was lied to. I was taught that Cook was a hero, and I was lied to constantly. How could I have been so naive to believe this? And as a young teacher, a few decades later in ignorance, I initially continued to perpetrate that lie. Our history curriculum, both then and for many years later, perpetrated this convenient and comfortable myth, and I'm profoundly sorry for this. And I'm embarrassed to say it was a Year 4 student who I taught who challenged me and said, "Mr. Thomas, but nobody comes into your home and enters in the front door and says to the owner, 'This is now my house.'" But quite simply, this is what happened, as we will hear today. Stolen home, stolen lands, done without consent. I'm pleased to say now that the Australian curriculum tells more of the truth. I'm proud to say that I work with a generation of teachers like Lara, who's with me, who seek to continue to listen, to understand and tell the truth that we are hearing about today. Yet there is much to do, but this is a wonderful start. I've been a school principal of an Anglican school for 17 years, and last year I was bestowed an honour of being named the Primary School Principal of Australia of the Year. And so I speak in this capacity today. As a leader of a Christian school, I'm ashamed of many of the actions caused by Christian leaders in schools and other institutions across Australia. What many religious leaders did in the name of God is abhorrent and certainly does not reflect the loving God that I believe in. I acknowledge the pain and trauma caused by many schools and religious institutions. I acknowledge the pain that is felt here today by many, and I offer my sincerest of apologies to you, to your family, to your land, your community who are here today. Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you, Doug and Lara. Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us today. This is a truth-telling day, the recognition way. By recognition we mean recognising our true history in the last 253 years. I want to bring you a word, a loving word, a gentle word that will reassure you. This is a people's movement built from the bottom up, and we are not in the blame game. You will not hear words that will leave you feeling wounded and condemned at this gathering. Neither are we a protest movement. Our national act of recognition is not a protest movement. We are an education movement. Our sole aim is to bring the early records into the open and place them under public scrutiny so that by our small contribution in that way, we might genuinely help the Australian people, the wider Australian community, to have a deeper understanding of what really did happen in the early days of colonisation in this country and its impact to this very day. In other words, what you will witness today and what you will share in today is this is the wider Australian community taking collective responsibility for bringing our true history into the open and placing it under public scrutiny. We will not be telling you what you should think about those early records. Our aim is to make those records, the early British records, available to you, draw your attention to them, and leave you free to make up your own minds about those records. My role is to participate in a collective responsibility to bring the truth into the open. And there's another absolutely top priority feature that runs in tandem with that. This is the day when the First Nations people of all the sovereign nations in this land have the opportunity to speak to us about the impact, about the consequences of colonisation on their nations, their clans, their families, and them personally. To finish that, and then I will get on with the first part of the truth-telling. For us, there are three terms that have the same meaning, that is, for the recognition organisation. Recognition, truth-telling, and education all have the same meaning. Those three terms have the same, mean the same thing, they have the same objective. So Let us begin by starting at the start. I take you back. We're now on section 3.3 on the tracking sheet. I take you back to the year 1768 and August of that year. At that time, the Endeavour was anchored, it was berthed at Plymouth in southern England, preparing to set sail under a commission to sail into the southern oceans and, amongst other objectives, visit here, this landmass that everyone in the Northern Hemisphere knew was here, but knew so little of. In that period, Cook, Lieutenant James Cook, no, he wasn't a captain. Let's do some myth-busting at the start. When he was here, he was lieutenant, but he was master of the Endeavour, and it was for that reason the title or the rank was attributed to him as captain. It was not the case when he was here. I understand he went on to achieve the rank of captain later down the track. As the Endeavour was being made ready, Cook had a visit from two British authorities. There were 4 authorities in Britain that had their finger in the pie of the decision to come to this land. The first, and at the top of the tree, was the British monarchy. At that time, it was King George III. The second layer of authority was the British Parliament. The third layer of authority involved in the commissioning was the Admiralty of Great Britain. And the fourth layer of authority was the British Royal Society. Cook had a visit from the Admiralty of Great Britain and from the President, Lord Morton, of the British Royal Society. And those two authorities handed Cook sealed envelopes of several pages of instructions for the voyage. Dominant in those instructions was this: when you visit other lands and you meet the peoples of those lands, if you are thinking of becoming aggressive with them, don't do it. Just don't do it. The secret instructions written from the Admiralty of Great Britain declared, when you meet the people of other nations, show every civility and regard. The written records from James Douglas, or Lord Morton, President of the British Royal Society, waxed even more lyrical. But the point was well made. When Cook opened the envelope, he read these words: "Have it in view that shedding the blood of those people is a crime of the highest nature. They, the inhabitants of the regions they inhabit, they are the legal possessors of those regions. No European nation has a right to occupy any part of their country or even settle among them without their voluntary consent. We are about to hear, in the context of those instructions, we are about to hear the truth in detail of what happened on the very first day of our shared history in 1770, just over here on the water. And now I'm going to hand back to our MC, Rod Thorpe, who will lead us into the next step.
Thank you, Lindsay. Yes, those words were actually quite new to me. I had not heard them until they were brought to my attention only just a year ago. And I think there'll be many Australians would not be aware of those instructions. So I'd like to hand over to Brendan Johnston, who's going to lead us through our next piece, our response to that.
Good morning and my respect to you all gathered here today. This next section, wrongdoing, 1. On 29th of April 1770, 4 criminal offences committed against First Nations at Kamay Botany Bay. These crimes began with an armed attack on the Gweagal people on country. These are extracts from Cook's journal. He wrote these in his log on the 29th of April. 1. They remained resolute, so a musket was fired over them. A musket loaded with small shot was now fired at the eldest of the 2, and we landed. They remained resolute, so a musket was fired over them. A musket loaded with small shot was now fired at the eldest of the 2, and we landed on the rock. It was an armed attack and entry against the Gweagal people. On country, a criminal offence. Number 2. 2 more muskets with small shot were then fired at them, on which the eldest threw 1 more lance and then ran away, as did the other. 2 more muskets with small shot were then fired at them, on which the eldest threw 1 more lance and then ran away, as did the other. James Cook and the Endeavour crew terrorised inhabitants into fleeing their property. Firstly, forced to flee the beach, families then fled from their homes in the village. A criminal offence. 3. We went up to the houses, in one of which we found the children hid. We went up to the houses, in one of which the children hid. A clear admission of armed trespass around very private property. A criminal offence. 4. We thought it no proper measure to take away with us all the lances which we could find about the houses, amounting in number to 40 or 50. All except one had 4 prongs. We thought it no proper measure to take away with us all the lances which we could find about the houses, amounting in number to 40 or 50. All except one had 4 prongs. These were fishing spears. Lieutenant Cook and Endeavour crew stole Gweagal food harvesting equipment, all they could find. A clear admission of armed robbery. a criminal offence. There is a fifth line in the Endeavour Journal written in Joseph Banks' own hand, which explains the underlying collective attitude toward these four criminal acts. This fifth line reveals the British thought they could do this to the people with no accountability. We, however, thought it no improper measure. We, however, thought it no improper measure.
Thank you, Brendan. So I'd like to call forth Nolene Timbery, who's the chairperson of the La Perouse Land Council, and she's going to give us some more understanding of the effects of that. Thank you, Nolene.
Good morning, everyone. Look, I want to start by acknowledging all my elders that I have here in the audience. Auntie Barb, of course, thank you for welcoming us. Uncle Ozzy, of course, Pastor Ray, Michael, all of the Aboriginal people that have come from many lands across this nation. And thank you all for being here. This place is special. It's as you've heard now. It's the place where it all began. And I do want to acknowledge Gweagal elders, past and present, and also Bidjigal elders, past and present, and all of their, all of their forebears that came before them, because it was the Gweagal and the Bidjigal people who were the first of the First Nations people that were impacted by European arrival. And that's something that should, remain in our hearts, that, they took that impact front on. As you've heard, there were warriors that opposed the landing. But Gweagal and Bidjigal people are still here, and we're connected to country, we're connected to our culture, and we haven't forgotten our history. I sat down a bunch of times to write a speech for today, and I kept going around in circles, so I figure it's just better to talk from the heart. So please excuse me if I stumble a little bit. The last time we were here, I stood up and I spoke alongside Shane Williams from our community. You might know him as Dr. Shane Williams or Uncle Shane Williams, Gweagal man, who, he recited a story that had been passed down to him and had been talked about many years ago by King Burriga. And the story he told was, Cook didn't discover us, we discovered him. And what he meant by that was, if you go back even further in Cook's journals, he talks about seeing fires being lit along the coastline as he came up the east coast. And, those fires weren't just fires, random fires. They were marking and tracking the progress of the what we know as a ship now, but of this, different being that was basically coming up the coastline. And there were tribesmen. They were carrying a message stick, and they were telling the tribes as they came up the coast that something was coming. So when the Gweagal people fronted that arrival, they knew that there was something coming. They were prepared for it. And that's why the journals also say that they didn't really see a lot of natives, a lot of the inhabitants when they landed. They just saw the two warriors that opposed them. Now, what I think Cook really, really failed to recognise was, these natives, as he described them, had a communication system, had a had a way of working, had protocols and had procedures that had to be followed, had a real sense of community, and he didn't recognise any of it. He recognised that, these people were living in huts and they had, lances he called them, but spears. And I think he thought that they weren't very advanced. But they were, because they had this community, they had this sense of working, they had this sense of, right and wrong. Auntie Barb got up and welcomed us to country. Now, the welcome to country itself is our modern day interpretation of giving and receiving permission to enter lands that aren't our own. And that's a long-held tradition. We just do it differently now because, we're in a modern era. But we're holding on to traditions like that, and we're processing them a little bit different, but we are maintaining our culture in a lot of different ways. As you've heard, the arrival, within minutes of the arrival, and the two men who opposed the landing were fired upon. That brings up a whole range of emotions. Within minutes, the first act of aggression towards our people was imposed. And yes, it goes against all of the instructions the cook and his men, or the men that he led, were given. But it also goes against the protocols of our people who, one, were wondering why people were trespassing, but also wondering why they were doing it so aggressively. So what happened here when after they made landing, and the warriors ran off, and the newcomers did a little bit more exploring, and yes, they found the hut with the children in there. Thank you, Brendan, for mentioning that. Yes, they came across the 40 to 50 odd lances that they took up. The story goes that they thought they were poisoned, so they took them. 40 or 50 lances, if you can picture it, is quite a lot of lances, quite a lot of spears. And yes, they took away hunting spears and fishing spears that I guess took away a bit of a food source too. So it wouldn't have taken any small amount of time to build up that stock of spears again. Look, there's a sidetrack. The spears do have a little bit of a nicer ending, and just to divert into that, there are about, of that 40 to 50, there are 4 still in existence that we know about. And Trinity College in Cambridge has agreed to hand them back to our community. So we're very proud and pleased that we've been able to work with them on that. And in April this year, we'll be going over there to get them. But that's 4 spears of 40 or 50, and sadly, I don't think we'll know where the rest of them went, or any of the other sort of artefacts that they collected on the way. Cook and his men, it does say in his journals too that they dropped beads and trinkets, and but they also noticed that none of them were retrieved. So, our ancestors didn't want a bar of them, and he wrote that in his journal as well. He described them as content. He described them as not wanting anything to do with us. All they wanted was for us to be gone. Those are the words that resonate with me, because he saw how happy they were, but he kind of made some really bad decisions anyway. I guess I'm thankful for those diaries. It's a really weird quandary to be in, because without the diaries, we wouldn't fully, I guess, be able to grasp and know and understand the extent of the wrongdoing. It's great that he was a record keeper, because he kept record of all the bad things he did. But it also, I guess, it marries up to some of the stories that have been passed down throughout my community. And one of them being that, you know, when that ship sailed in here, they became part of our stories as well. And let's not forget that, because that's a really important part of it. This isn't a story that should be told from one side, it's a story that should be told from both. I'm really proud that I come from a community that's strong, that's resilient, that has, as I say, 250 odd years later, my people are still connected to country, they're still connected to community. We still talk about our history and we embrace our history. And yes, when it was once, you fellas let them in, it's not that anymore. It's a story of resilience. That may have happened, but we're still here. We haven't forgotten. Even in the shadow of, you know, this country's largest city, we are still here, and we're very thankful for that. And we're also very thankful for you for recognising our truths and bringing this forward. Before I go, I do want to pay special mention to Lindsay and all the work that he's done with our community and the many communities across Australia. Without his drive and energy, we wouldn't be here today. And this has been a project that I think has been going on for at least a couple of decades, because I know that Lindsay's been coming to our meetings for a very long time. So thank you, Lindsay, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you very much, Nolene. Thank you for your words from the heart. I think they were very, very appropriate. So, I'd just like to invite up Doug and Lara. They're going to lead us through a response.
Well, firstly, thank you, Nolene. That was amazing. Invite you to stand if you would like to.
Microphone, please.
Thank you for the reminder again. Sorry about that. And together we will say in unison, we make this truth-telling statement based on factual records. We publicly reject and strongly condemn this armed attack on Gweagal people on country. These colonising actions are unacceptable to us. They were not done in our name. We recognise the truth and we hereby declare these criminal offences against First Nations people were wrong. Thank you. Please be seated.
That was exciting. Okay, thank you for that. So that brings us to our wrongdoing number 2, and I'd like to invite up Lindsay again to introduce that for us.
Thank you again, Rod. As we've made our way through this journey, we have the tracking sheet that you're following, but attached to the tracking sheet are the records that you are able to take away with you. And when we understand all of those records were recorded by the British, when we join up the dots, those records reveal how horrendous this experience and the devastation it just simply had to cause for the First Nations people in the years that were to follow. So the records, we have been very, very careful to make sure we provide them to you, and we are leaving you free to come to your own mind about those records. I'm taking us now to the next page on the tracking sheet, and the ship is no longer at Kamay Botany Bay. The ship has moved to just a little bit west of Cape York, a little west of the very tip of Cape York, to an island about maybe 30 kilometres or so to the west of the tip of Cape York. That island is located in the nation of the Kararig people. These days it is referred to as Possession Island. That, of course, is not the name that belongs to that island. The Kararig people are the custodians of that name. The record that you have in your sheet of papers reveal what happened, recorded by Cook in his own hand in the Endeavour journals. And Cook makes this clear, that when on Possession Island, he looked southward, and whether he raised his hand or not, we will never know. But what we do know from his own words, he spoke a declaration of taking possession of lands. Something in the record that you have in your sheets is missing, and I'm going to fill it in now because it is so revealing. And if you turn in your papers to a map that's toward the back, you will see in illustrated form the story that Cook recorded in his words. He claimed that he spoke a declaration of taking possession all the way to the 38th latitude. Now, earlier in his record that you don't have in your sheet, he specified that it was the 38th latitude. In the record you have, he just talks about the above named latitude. But when we study the story forensically and come to understand what was really happening in that moment, Cook was declaring that he spoke a declaration taking possession of lands all the way from Cape York, to use the modern name, to the 38th latitude. And where is that 38th latitude? The 38th latitude south runs almost through Melbourne. So we learn when we study forensically the truth of what happened. Cook was taking possession of many sovereign lands in a straight line all the way through to Melbourne. Some of those lands, like the Gamilaroi, or the Wiradjuri, or the Kurnai people, or the Yorta Yorta people, they were several hundred kilometres inland. Not only, and this is the point that needs to be understood by the Australian people, not only had they not given consent for possession to be changed, they were hundreds of kilometres inland. They did not even know the Cook visit had happened. let alone give consent. The story is a little more revealing as we come to understand it through studying the truth. That declaration happened on the 22nd of August 1770. They were here in April. We're now talking August, that same year. The 22nd of August 1770 took effect from then, in a manner of speaking, because that is the report Cook and Banks took back to Great Britain. If we take the example of the Wiradjuri nation, which is just over the range, and when you drop down the other side of the Great Dividing Range, you enter the Bathurst region, in our understanding, and you enter the nation of the Wiradjuri people, which runs all the way through to Hay. The settlers didn't go over the mountain in great volume until 1815. And when we join the dots, we come to see something. That for the Wiradjuri people and all the nations around them in that same region, they lived for 45 years, never knowing that the future of their people had already been sealed. They lived 45 years under this cloud, never knowing that this decision had been made, and they were living under this coming cloud, never knowing it had taken place, let alone giving consent. We are here today to become aware of the horrendous impact on the sovereign nations and the consequence for the peoples who belong to country in those sovereign nations that was unleashed upon the traditional people of this continent in 1770. This is the truth of what has taken place. This is the understanding that the wider Australian people, for their own benefit, need to come into touch with, because until we know the truth, we are all in bondage. Until the truth is clear and we can sit down together and say, that is what happens. That explains why we still have this unresolved cloud hanging over us, because it has never been dealt with. And that cloud will continue to hang over us, dividing us, until we sit down together and say, that is the truth. What do we want to do about it? Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. I'd like to call forth Pastor Ray Minikun to give us some more understanding of those actions on his people.
I always deeply appreciate Auntie Barb's welcome to country. I'm from the Kabi Kabi people on my dad's side, Goring Goring on my mum's side, and also on my grandfather's side, I'm from Ambram Island in Vanuatu. And so thank you for welcoming me to your country here, Gweagal country. Never ceded. And In response also to today's long overdue recognition, I do want to pay my deepest respect to Reverend Lindsay McDowell. Lindsay, your sheer tenacity and dogged determination made possible this day. I remember back in 1996, I think it was, when you came into our World Vision office and offered this opportunity to have this day embedded in our history. And I knew at that time, because I'm from that other country, that it wasn't my responsibility and it was their responsibility. And you went to the Land Council there at La Perouse and to Uncle Oz and all the people here in this particular area who have that deep responsibility to be able to guide Lindsay into doing what he has done over so many years, and that's why we're here today. Let me start, I guess. I read your declaration, powerful, and I want to bring a few other declarations to bear on this particular day. I want to start with 4 declarations that were made by our Australian High Court on 2 very important decisions that have an impact upon this particular day. One decision was about our recognition of sovereignty over our lands in the Mabo decision in 1992. And the second High Court decision is our rights to our unique identity in the Love and Trump versus the Commonwealth decision in 2020. I've embellished it a bit, but here's the 4 declarations. I want to declare that all Indigenous peoples are entitled, as against the whole world, to possession, occupation, use and enjoyment of the lands of their ancestors. 2, I want to declare that all Indigenous peoples are not outsiders or foreigners in their own lands. They are the descendants of the first peoples of their country, the original inhabitants, and they are to be recognised as such. 3, I want to declare that none of the events of invasion, settlement, federation, or the advent of foreign citizenship laws have displaced the unique position of Indigenous peoples with their lands. And 4, I want to declare that Indigenous peoples have a unique connection to their country. It is not just ancestry or place of birth or even both. Indigenous peoples have a connection with the land, waters and skies under Indigenous laws and customs. No imposed Citizenship Act has removed or modified that connection. No parliament or foreign government has removed or modified that connection by any other laws or legislation. These are the declarations of the High Court of Australia on those 2 major issues. As I reflected on this day, I only had a couple of weeks to do it in, and thank you, Michael Steed, wherever you are. There. Thanks, Michael. I was trying to figure out what would we say on a day like this. How could we respond, not just as Aboriginal people, but as Australian people? And I was reminded very quickly when I read the declaration, there in your articles that you have, of some of the very powerful words of ex-Prime Minister Paul Keating's words, that he spoke in Redfern Park in December 1992. And it summarizes this response to wrongdoing, taking possession of many sovereign lands without consent. I was in that audience that day, on that auspicious day in December 1992. Here's some of the excerpts that our Prime Minister, Paul Keating, spoke on that day. He said, "I want to bring the dispossessed out of the shadows, to recognise that they are part of us and that we cannot give Indigenous Australians up without giving up many of our own most deeply held values, much of our own identity and our own humanity. We simply cannot sweep injustice aside. Even if our conscience allowed us to, I am sure," said the Prime Minister on that day, "that in due course, the world and the people of our region would not sweep injustice aside for Indigenous Australians. However intractable the problems are, we cannot resign ourselves to failure any more than we can hide behind the contemporary version of social Darwinism, which says to reach back for the poor and dispossessed is to risk being dragged down with them. Isn't it reasonable to say that if we can build a prosperous and remarkably harmonious multicultural society in Australia, surely we can find just solutions to the problems which beset first Australians, the people to whom the most injustices has been done?" He goes on to say, "And as I say," and this is how poignant it is for today, "and as I say, the starting point might be to recognise the problem starts with us non-Aboriginal Australians. It begins, I think, with the act of recognition. Recognition that it was we who did the dispossessing. We took the traditional lands and smashed the traditional way of life. We brought the diseases. We brought the alcohol. We committed the murders. We took the children from their mothers. We practiced discrimination and exclusion. It was our ignorance and our prejudice. We failed to ask, how would I feel if this was done to me? And as a consequence, we failed to see what we were doing degraded all of us." The Prime Minister goes on to add, "The message should be that there is nothing to fear or to lose in the recognition of historical truth, or even the extension of social justice, or the dispensing of Australian social democracy to include Indigenous Australians. There is everything to gain. Even the unhappy past speaks for this. Where Aboriginal Australians have been included in the life of Australia, they have made remarkable contributions, economic contributions, particularly in the pastoral and agricultural industries as well as the fishing industries. Uncle Oz here was a pearl diver. They are there at the frontier and exploration history of Australia. Our people were there in the wars. Our people are in sport to an extraordinary degree. We're there in literature and art and music and all of these things. Aboriginal people have shaped our knowledge of this continent and of ourselves. They have shaped Australian identity. They are there in the Australian legend. We should not forget they have helped build this nation. And if we have a sense of justice as well as common sense, we will, from this day forward, forge a new partnership. as the Prime Minister said on this day. It might help us if we non-Aboriginal Australians imagined ourselves dispossessed of land we had lived on for 50,000 years, and then imagined ourselves and told that had never been ours. Imagine if ours was the oldest culture in the world, and then we were told that it was worthless. Imagine if we had resisted this settlement, suffered and died in the defence of our land, and then were told in history books that we had given it up without a fight. Imagine if non-Aboriginal Australians had served their country in peace and war and were even ignored in our history books. Imagine if our feats on sporting fields had inspired admiration and patriotism and yet did nothing to diminish discrimination and prejudice. Imagine if our spiritual life was denied and ridiculed. Imagine if we had suffered the injustices and they were blamed for it. It seems to me, says the Prime Minister, that if we can imagine the injustices, we can imagine its opposition, and we can have justice. He said for two reasons. He said, I say it because I believe that the great things about Australians as social democracy reflect a fundamental belief in justice. And I say it because in so many other areas we have proved our capacity over the years to go on extending the realms of our participation, opportunity and care. He says we are beginning to learn what the Indigenous people have known for many thousands of years, how to live with our physical environment. Ever so gradually, we are learning how to see Australia through Aboriginal eyes, beginning to recognise the wisdom contained in their epic story. I think we are beginning to see how much we owe the Indigenous Australians and how much we have lost by living so apart. He said, I said we non-Indigenous Australians should try to imagine the Aboriginal view. It can't be hard. Someone like a Reverend Lindsay McDowell imagined this day. And so now it is a marvellous reality and a great reason for hope. But the Prime Minister said this, there is one thing today, and I repeat that today, that we cannot imagine. We cannot imagine that the descendants of people whose genius and resilience maintained a culture here through 50,000 years or more, through cataclysmic changes to the climate and environment, who then survived over 2 centuries of dispossession and abuse, will be denied their place in the modern Australian nation. We cannot imagine that. Can you? And with that spirit that is here today, I'm confident that we won't. I'm confident that we will succeed in our future together. And so I say thank you, Lindsay, for your tenacity, your doggedness to make today possible. Thank you to a Prime Minister who could see the possibilities of what this nation can achieve. That was in 1992. And thank you, my fellow Australians, for coming here to join in this particular very poignant event today to once again reimagine what Australia should be, could be, and must be. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pastor Ray. I'll call forth Doug and Lara to lead us in response.
Thank you so much. I will ask everyone to stand, please. Wrongdoing 2. Taking possession of many sovereign lands without consent. We make this truth-telling statement based on factual records. We publicly reject and strongly condemn this taking possession of many lands without consent. These colonising actions are unacceptable to us. They were not done in our name. We recognise the truth and we hereby declare this taking possession of lands without consent was wrong. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll invite forward Lindsay to lead us in our third wrongdoing. We're going to call forth Pamela Lane, who is a historian and has been the research person for the National Act of Recognition, and she's going to lead us into our third wrongdoing.
I would also like to pay my respects to everybody here, especially elders past, present and emerging. You've heard about wrongdoing 1 and wrongdoing 2. So this here is an examination of the third major wrongdoing. Anne's going to hold up a picture, and it's a picture of the United Kingdom government when George III was the sovereign. The important thing here is that for about a decade they had been discussing and debating and arguing what they would do with the superfluity of convicts that they had. They'd had them in hulks on the Thames, but they couldn't contain them anymore. They used to send them to America. But in 1776, so about a decade and a half after Cook was here, in 1776, the American colonies, in 1786, the American colonies declared independence. So they couldn't send their convicts there anymore. In 1786, the Prime Minister, Pitt the Younger, declared, okay, what we will do, we've been talking about this for a long time, we will send them to the Great South Land, the one that Cook and Banks had reported back on a decade and a half ago. Now, it was mainly Banks who reported back that there weren't very many people there. Just a few natives around the edges of the continent. And so the concept of terra nullius was born. Terra nullius meaning no one's land, land belonging to no one. So in May 1787, a whole group of ships sailed from Plymouth. They took 8 months to sail and to reach Botany Bay. Same bay as is here. Slightly different spot, but here they were. And they were here for a bit over a week. And Captain Arthur Phillip, who was the leader of the expedition, felt that this was not the right place to establish a colony. He needed to take his group of people into Sydney Cove, and that's what he did. So there were 11 ships and 1,400 people. Next one, Anne, thank you. And basically, they arrived in Sydney Cove on the 26th of January, 1788. They did the ritual fundraising, flag raising, gun saluting. But the actual establishment of the colony wasn't until the 7th of February, when the Judge Advocate read out Philip's commission, in which George III declared his well-beloved Captain Arthur Phillip would be the governor of this new colony of New South Wales. Historians have looked at this carefully, and they believe generally that it was this establishment of a colony on the land that reinforced the original claim that Cook had made, and it reinforced it through occupation. There were other Europeans who'd come to Australia before. There was Dirk Hartog in 1616. There was William Dampier in 1699, west coast of Australia. But as far as we know, none of them claimed the land for their sovereign, and certainly they didn't recommend that a colony be established there and say this would be a suitable place for a colony. No colonies ever followed their visits. But a colony did follow Cook's first visit, and it was this establishment of a colony here in Sydney, at Sydney Cove, that really was a huge significance. Next one, Anne, thank you. The next few years were very hard for this newly established colony. They found it difficult to grow food. It was hard. So they started to expand in the Sydney Basin. They went north up to Newcastle, and they went south to Wollongong, and west as far as what we now call Penrith. And during that period, there was a first land grant made at Parramatta, and it was made to an ex-convict named James Roos. Now, Philip was actually quite an enlightened man for his time. You didn't generally have convicts being granted land, but he believed that was the right thing to do. I'm going to read you the exact words in the document where the land was granted to James Roos. In pursuance of the power and authority vested in me, I do give and grant unto James Roos, his heirs and assigns, to have and to hold forever 30 acres of land. And that was at Parramatta. I'll just repeat. I do give to James Roos to have and to hold forever 30 acres of land. And that's in that official document that you can see in the official records. So Philip was an enlightened man, but it raises the question, who gave Philip the authority to give land away? And the answer, legally, no one. But it took 202 years for that answer to come. And as has already been mentioned, that was the Mabo decision in 1992, because it overturned the terra nullius assumption that no one owned the land or had sovereignty over it. Every time that land was given, First Nations people were pushed off their own land, their own country. And as Lindsay has already mentioned, in 1815 the Blue Mountains were crossed by Europeans, and we spread further than the Great Dividing Range. Last one, thanks, Anne. So this is the great land grab. Remember, there was no consent ever given by First Nations people to Governors Phillip or Macquarie or those who followed to give away land that was not theirs to give. No consent was ever given. And I think that's what we are here to reflect on today. We're here to reflect on the significance of the arrival of that first fleet and the establishment of a colony. We're here to reflect on the effect that had on First Nations people, not just here within the Sydney Basin, but throughout the whole of Australia. And I'm glad we're here today to reflect on that, because it means we've started to think about the need to recognise that these wrongdoings occurred. Thank you, Rod.
Thank you, Pamela. To help us reflect on some of those impacts, we've got three Aboriginal people are going to here to share with us, and the first of those is Pastor Ozzie Cruz. He's a senior elder. He was an advisor, I think, to multiple prime ministers, and I think at one stage spoke to the United Nations. Was that you? Yeah. And now lives down on the south coast at Eden. So, could you come and share with Pastor Ozzie?
Long way up there. Sorry? Yeah, no, I'm okay. Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, well, it's good that we're here having these open discussions. I'd like to just bring us to some of the real solid truths. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. So everything belongs to Him, the Creator. And we all knew the Creator. Aboriginal people had a name for Him, Mirial, the Creator. And so that when we think in terms of our nation, I would like to look at one word, love. I love this country, and I'm sure that, and I love the people of this country. And, I worked with some incredible organisations. I was a member of the World Council of Indigenous People. I spent lots of times in Geneva talking about world issues of Indigenous people. I spent time in Hawaii, where I became Deputy Chairman of the Pacific Asia Council of Indigenous People. And so we've had a lot of interaction on the lives of Indigenous people and their connection to the places where they live. And when I come to Australia, come back home to Australia, you've got to realise that we are a multicultural nation, and we all belong connected to each other, and we should never forget that. And I don't want to see our nation come apart when in discussing the pigment of our skin. The fact is that we're all one under God, the Creator. And so I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that really, what we call the Uluru Statement. There was over 300 people met at Uluru. Uluru is Ayers Rock, the centre of Australia. And we drew up a statement, the Uluru Statement, that concluded with our children walking together into the future. We wanted to see peace in this country on the Uluru Statement. We wanted to see all this arguing about where you come from, where you're going, who you belong to, put to rest. We said there at Uluru that we were not going to construct any in issues that would be disgusting or discrimination to us as a people. Our idea was, and it still is, from the Uluru Statement, that the black and white children will walk together into the future, and that there'll be no differences of culture. And so that statement will always be the real issue that's at hand. When we look at the world around us, we can see that there's so much unrest, so many terrible things happening. And we, as a people, need to know that. Back in the 40s, there were world wars going on. And our soldiers came home to Australia, all standing at the Empire Hotel in Nowra in their uniforms. And I'll never forget it. The barman went along the counter with these soldiers lined up there, standing there, all with their mates, fighting a war. And the barman said, I can serve you. I can't serve you two Aborigines a beer. They were going to have a beer before they split up. They still had their kit bags and gear from the war. Now, what they did to that Empire Hotel in Nowra was terrible. There wasn't a piece of glass left in contact. The soldiers went mad. Not the Aboriginal soldiers. The guys that were with them smashed every glass that was in that building, windows and everything. Now, the barman was right, because you couldn't serve Aboriginal people in those days. It was against the law. But the fact is, they should have just said, oh, let's this be one up for these fellas. They all fought a war together. They came home together. Let them have a beer together. But they didn't. They put the legal list of the law in place at that time. And so there's strange things happening in the world. And as a people, we need to be able to create a world, a better world, and it's our responsibility always for our children's children in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Ozzy. So I'd like to call forth Pastor Michael Duckett, who leads a ministry here in Campbelltown.
Michael Duckett's my name. I'm a Dungari fella from the North Coast. I'm a sinner saved by grace, by the goodness of God, and I'm also an Anglican minister that comes second, because I'm a sinner first. And I was just sharing some language from my old people, saying who I am. I'm a Dungari fella. I'm asking the Lord to be good to us, and funnily enough, I feel a bit strange talking amongst my uncles here, who've led the way for so many years, and I'm just a young fella, you know. And I don't know if you have to wear a hat to be a leader these days, but my uncles sure wear their hats real good, you know. And I just happen to have my hat. But I want to one, thank God for his goodness to my uncles, my auntie. These are the ones who fought the fight, who led the way for generations amongst my people. And I take my hat off, that God has been good in a place where there's been a lot of evil. On a personal note, in regards to stolen generation, my mum was one of 8, 4 taken, 4 left. I knew my Uncle Laws years ago, and I never met my mum till I was 21 years of age. So I did not know who I was. But God touched my life at a young age, and I knew who I was as a child of God. And then I caught up with Uncle Laws and told him who my mother was. Once I learned who my mother was, he says, "I've known your mum for a long time." And lo and behold, I'm related to my uncle. So I knew him, but didn't know I had blood ties to him. So what I'm trying to say is that even in a land where there was a lot of devastation, there was also the goodness of God bringing back to our people. And still many are still travelling this land trying to find their connections to land, connecting to their families, to find who their families are. And that's a journey. And sadly, many of our people have passed not knowing where their land was, not knowing their families, and that really hurts me and saddens me. So this pathway we're on here, with recognition, if it leads to enabling people to find their roots, not just in this country but to their families, I think that's a bonus. I love the yarns. I love the videograph there from old Auntie holding that. That was awesome. That was pretty impressive. Thank you, Aunt. But as we learnt that there was a land grab, so I've been in Campbelltown 16 years now. It's not my country. It's not where I come from, but I've been privileged to preach the word there. So as I extended the land grabs over to the MacArthur, to Campbelltown, we learnt that the land was granted to pastoralists. And what they did, as soon as they turned up, they started clearing the land and putting up fences. It's called the cow pasture region. And what happened is, with the fencing and the clearing, our wildlife moved. The old meadows, there used to be the kangaroos, well, they just packed up because it was just a different land. There's a bull cave over there, still there today, fenced off, with the paintings of the old people painting of a bull that they first saw, thinking, what on earth is this? And they painted to record it. At the same time, we're talking about 1810, then we move into 1816, where there was a conflict between Aboriginal people and pastoralists over land, food. It was all driven by food, mind you, the need to survive for our families, our children. So in 1816 there was a drought, and it was a serious drought. There was scarce food, but there was all of these fat cows. So you could imagine the Aboriginal people thinking, well, there's no tucker here, there's no KFC, there's no Portos, but there's these cows, So they come down from the mountain range and kill a few for the sake of their children to survive. So it's very simplistic in the sense of we need survival for the children. Well, as you know, the pastoralists reacted to that, and 40 of them got together with weapons and ended up with a big conflict. The governor here in Sydney heard about it, Governor Macquarie, so hence he responded and gave the directions and authorised a hunt of Aboriginal people, basically. And he gave, this is the first recorded incident in this country where a massacre was authorised, where it was recorded that he gave permission to kill Aboriginal people. So hence they formed several parties to go out through the region looking for this Aboriginal people, this group, who were involved in a conflict. And in that conflict there was people killed, black and white, and so this was to solve it. So they went out to into the MacArthur region to a place near Appin, and it's in 1816 on the 17th of April. It's about 1 a.m. in the morning, and this brigade came through the bush because they were made aware there was Aboriginal people there. They heard a little baby cry, and they came over towards the camp, There was nobody at the camp because they all moved out to hide. And then the dog, there was a dog barking, because you find Aboriginal people have dogs because they keep kids warm and they're good for hunting. So a dog barked, which then alerted them to their location. And then the formation moved through the bush, shooting at will. We read there's a record of them being basically pushed off the cliff edge to their death, women, children. The records say 14 people were killed that day. That's not including those off the cliff. So there's a greater account of more than 14. It's not about the number of people. Once they finished shooting, both women, children, then they decapitated several members of the Aboriginal people, women, men. They took those heads back to England to do tests on them. And I'm only telling you this because it's real, it's true. And those who were left laying on the ground, they hung up on trees, basically, as a warning to all other Aboriginal people that if you are caught doing anything other than what you're allowed to do, there'll be consequences of death. And you could travel all throughout the Sydney Basin at times, and you'll encounter Aboriginal people hanging on trees as a warning of what will happen. So now, over 200 years, we had the 200th anniversary a little while ago, and it was thousands of people came for that recognition of those old people and the massacre, the first one in this country. And the context is this, that even though it was 200 years ago, the event, the heads of those people who were decapitated are still in a box today. Now, I say that to our shame that they haven't been laid to rest, because it's just proper to lay bones to rest. Every other culture in the world does that, but we are still struggling to try and lay these skulls to rest. So when people say history is history, that is true, but in the Campbelltown region, we still suffer the consequences of that massacre, where people have been brought in back in the 70s from Redfern, and when Aboriginal people are too many around, they move them. And that's why Campbelltown became, we're now the second largest population in Sydney, let alone Australia, of Aboriginal people. And did you know there's nobody there from the traditional lands? There's very few, because it's been inundated by all these different tribes and different regions all over Australia, which don't mean there's a lot of conflict, people from different lands. And so the side effects of the dispossession, the massacres, just in Campbelltown alone, let alone here in Sydney, the side effects is continuation of desolation to my people, brokenness, hopelessness, and it sounds very depressing, I'm sorry, but I can say that in the midst of all that, like Uncle Oz said, God loves us, and God his purpose is to draw all men unto himself through his Son Jesus Christ. So that's my hope, and I've seen it happen. I've seen it firsthand, the power of God come into someone's lives who is broken and lives in despair, to then find hope and a future. And so I give God the glory that an uncle, I was talking with the Archbishop yesterday, our Archbishop Kaniska Raphael, and he said in 1996 he was sitting with you in Canberra when you were initiating those discussions about your dream. And he says to me, and he's still on that journey. And I said, wow, that is amazing. So God works in mysterious ways. He uses the weak to confound the wise for his glory. And that's why I believe that our people are going to one day lead this country back to God. Not because we're special, but if God chooses, he will use the weak to confound the wise, that he may be glorified. And we have an opportunity to bring back to this country the wealth of God's goodness, the wealth of his blessings, and God will fulfill his purposes regardless of what men do. That's cool, that's good. And funnily enough, this little coin of Captain Cook's commemoration, I bought it yesterday for $10, it was crazy, in the city, and it was done in 1970, and I was born in 1970, and this little coin made me laugh, but also made me sad, that when they came to this land, it wasn't just to get rid of their prisoners, it was to make riches And as this corny to remind ourselves that the focus of Kamay was to take the wealth of this land, the goodness of this country, to make their country wealthier. But God is our provider, our source, and He's the one who makes us rich. So thanks be to God.
Thank you, Pastor Michael, for those words and thoughts. And I'd like to call on also Elder Auntie Barb, if you can also share some thoughts into this space.
Thank you, Michael. Beautiful words of wisdom, words of truth-telling. Opens our eyes and see what's there before us. This is the birthplace of the Timbri family. This is the dynasty and the dynasty of the Timbri people. When we look at country, we can reflect and remember the great men that were here when those ships sailed in, the warrior men that stood on the shores and encountered the ships, challenged. They didn't give up. And they had their strong women with them. This was all thick bush this year when those ships sailed in. 11 ship, 1,400 people coming ashore, an invasion, taking land that wasn't theirs, dispossessing, brought their diseases, smallpox, syphilis, gonorrhea, heartache, pain. Our people here encountered it, more so than the Timbri family, who were a part of this year, the awakening, when they met all these people coming ashore. Water holes poisoned, rivers poisoned, flowers poisoned. When Aboriginal people can sow the land, till the land, and did it so pristinely in a unique way, white man didn't like it. White man wanted to take back what wasn't his. He did it. He did it in so many ways. They dispossessed, took the kids away. I am a stolen child, taken away as an 8-year-old in 1956. It's taught me a lot about history, culture, life, and being connected to the land. It's changed my views on things. I remember strongly, I married an Englishman, and I remember my father visiting Little Bay. I could never invite him inside. I met him at the fence, and I talked to him there. My English in-laws didn't invite him inside. Yet his children are also part of that English family, and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. I had 5 children to that man, and I thought of those families later on. What you'd done to me and to my father was wrong. But my father, being a strong man, a Sims man, with connections also to the Timbri family, made me feel strong and proud of who I am. And to the great people that come from La Perouse, the great families, some of our dominant women and our dominant men that had been there, done this, been a part of the land councils, great women, matriarchal women that we come from and we see. Makes me proud of who I am. And I look at my dad, who's no longer here, when he was taken away, when his mother died. And he was a man of wisdom. My mother coming to live on my dad's country at La Perouse. She was a Wandi woman from the Yuin Nation. And to be accepted into the country there, on that land, meant a lot for us as a people. The same woman who taught me culture, showed me how to give unstintedly, how to live, and be a proud woman of who I am. And I've done a lot in my lifetime. I try to achieve the best of my ability. But it's our women that went before us that did all this for us. Our matriarchal women, our men, those resistant warriors. When those ships came in here, when they came ashore, they rampaged, they pillaged, they stole, they shot, they trampled. Did they rape? Makes one wonder, doesn't it? Because they needed women. How many women were on those 11 ships? How many women were there to satisfy those men? And when those men came ashore, how many First Nations women did they take? It makes you wonder. One stops to think about it. Today we can sit here as black and white in this same place here under this marquee, and we can walk together in unity and in harmony, and we'll continue to do so if we just reflect, remember and think what happened, and we look at atrocities where there are massacres that had happened. There are massacres around Sydney. When we look at explorers sailing, going across the mountains, did they walk it alone? No. They were shown by Aboriginal guides who guided them across the mountains, right up to the plains. How they tilled the land and worked the land. Aboriginal people were fascinating people. We are still fascinating people today. We are unique. There's no one in the world quite like us. No one. What we have, how it's embraced. When we go out before others, think of who we are. I can walk with you. I can talk with you. I can sit down and break bread with you. Reverend Lindsay, for what you've done. You've led the way. You've shown a people you can do it. It's taken a long time. Look where we are today. 2nd of March, 2024. You've achieved. And the great people has walked with you and done this with you. To the woman who sits on your side there. Man's got to have woman. Woman's got to have man. You make a great combination. A great union. As we leave here today, let's reflect on what we have here as a people. Let's go forward. We'll never forget the past. We will never forget the atrocities that we had. And I look at them brilliant women of La Perouse, some great matriarchal women that raised families there, lived on the mission, under the manager system, under the policeman's watch. You did it. And your great men by your side, our great men of La Perouse, our great artefact makers. I am proud to say the Sims family coming to the Timbri family. Nolene, thank you. I'm not sure if Shane Williams is there, but the great man he is too as well, and a great family that he comes from. I was hoping he'd be here today because I needed to put him onto another gentleman that wanted to talk to him. So I leave you with one thought. Let's walk together. Let's think of who we are as a people and reflect on tomorrow. There will be many tomorrows to come, like yesterday's gone by. Let's walk in unity. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Annie Barbara. That's great. Okay, I'll call forth Doug and Lara to lead us through the next piece.
Wrongdoing number 3. The sending of First Fleet, 11 ships, 1,400 people, proclaiming the colony, Governor Phillip, on 7th of February 1788, without consent. I invite you to stand as together we say, "We make this truth-telling statement based on factual records. We publicly reject and strongly condemn the sending of 11 ships and 1,400 people without consent. These colonising actions are unacceptable to us. They were not done in our name. We recognise the truth, and we hereby declare this colonising action against First Nations people was wrong."
Thank you. Please be seated. We'd like to respond as a wider community, and so I call forth Nick Jensen and also Wendy Francis, who are going to lead us through that time.
Thank you. Nick and I will lead you first through the respondent time, so I would ask you to stand and join with us. We have heard you. We do not want to leave you to struggle on your own. We want to stand with you. We want to struggle with you.
Thank you. Please be seated. So good to be back here. I was here on the 1st and so glad to be back. And can I also honour you, Lindsay? But I'm just so grateful to you for what you've done. I also want to just be a little bit cheeky and shout out to the women in Managrita who have designed my skirt. There's an amazing centre in Managrita. It's a world-renowned centre, Barbara Centre, the Barbara Women's Centre, and they design exquisite fabrics and they handprint the material. So I wore that in their honour today. But you know, it's impossible to comprehend for me as a modern day Christian. It's impossible to comprehend how the European Christians whose faith taught them that all people were equal, made in God's image, how could they have been involved in the mistreatment of Indigenous Australians? How could the tenets of faith be ignored to that extent, and not only ignored, but actually used to justify outright racism? The colony's original charter was to establish harmonious relationships with the existing inhabitants of this nation. But as we've heard, it didn't happen that way. Diseases, land grabs, and outright massacres led to the annihilation of entire communities. The loss of land was a tragedy for First Nations peoples, akin to losing dignity and identity. First Nation people were stopped from getting to their waterholes and their hunting grounds, and if that wasn't bad enough, through massacres such as the brutal slaughter at Mile Creek in 1838, unspeakable violence was perpetrated on men, women and children. When I say unspeakable, I didn't feel as if I could actually repeat some of the things today. Little more than a century after first contact with Europeans, the Indigenous population had been reduced drastically. The history of colonisation is an example of what it looks like when so-called Christians exercise power for their own benefit. But what does it look like when the opposite occurs? When powerful people from any cultural background exercise that power for the good of others. And the example of Jesus, who said, "I have come not to be served, but to serve and give my life a ransom for many." And this is one of selfless service, completely opposite to the way that the early colonisers exercised their assumed leadership and power. The one who was most deserving of position and title chose servant as his title and humility as his attitude. The legacy of Jesus, his example, must be the pattern for our lives going forward. What would happen if those who claimed to follow Jesus in the past and those who claim to follow him today actually followed his example by laying down titles, positions, status, posturing and influence to become servants of all? We are called to follow his example and live his life, and we are to serve and sacrifice for others. Living to serve others is actually the Jesus way of life, and that is what I want to determine to do for myself and the generations that follow me. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. My name's Nick. I'm with Alpha Crucis University College, and I'd like to... Can you get that microphone up, please? I can. With Alpha Crucis University College, and I want to acknowledge the elders here today, past, present, and emerging, and Lindsay as well for bringing us here today. I am an 8th generation Australian. My ancestor, first one to come to Australia, was James William Weavers, who traversed these waters when he first arrived in Australia. He wasn't on the Endeavour, but arrived not long after the First Fleet in 1790 on the HMS Surprise. He was a convict, and he was about my age now when sentenced for burglary in England and transported against his will to this land. On his journey over, his ship, originally the HMS Guardian, hit an iceberg. There were 300 people on board initially, but only 61 survived. James Weaver was one of about 20 convicts who actually made it here. and he received an immediate conditional pardon on landing due to his assistance in the crisis. He was granted 30 acres of land, as Pamela talked about earlier, of Eora land in 1792, around what used to be known as Kissing Point, now the area of Ryde. By 1800, the land had 6 acres sown in wheat and 6 in maize, also running 17 sheep, 14 pigs, and a goat, though it's still dependent on government food stores. By 1805, he had expanded to 200 acres on what is now the North Ryde Golf Course. This was the area of the Wallumedegal people, however. Smallpox by then had killed half of their tribe already, and the developments at Parramatta had forced disparate tribes together into the flatlands. Family historians recorded that James Weavers had friendly relationships with the local Aboriginal people, respecting their waterholes and sacred places, with the locals also helping him at harvest time. How much truth there is to this is not certain, as around March 21st, 1805, James Weavers had a skirmish with a number of the local tribes, dying 2 weeks later from the injuries sustained. He was one of the first casualties of the early frontier wars, as talked about by Pastor Duckett. As we stand here today and make these statements, the question arises in me, what is justice in this situation? Should the killers of James Weavers have been charged with murder of a victim of circumstance who was simply trying to make the best of it in a land he didn't want to come to? Or was it this just punishment for a man who'd made use of a power that squatted and encroached further and further into a land that never belonged to him? Ancient law clashed against British law, and the result was tragedy. Isn't this question of justice the fundamental one, as Pastor Minikin raised earlier? When people talk of justice today, it appears to revolve primarily around the concept of retribution. But at its core, justice is about relationship. That is what was missed within this first interaction that we're acknowledging here between Europeans and First Nations people. There was no honour given. There was no sense of equality. There was no respect of liberty, no peace, no consideration of what was due, and a dishonesty of intention from the first. No relationship is going to flourish without these constituents: honour, equality, liberty, harmony, due, and truth. So that is what I recognize today and respond to as a descendant of those early conflicts. We start with truth, and we pray that true justice, that is right relationship, may follow. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Wendy. Doug and Lara, can you come and lead us?
Well, thank you. We've come to the conclusion of our time, our formal time together, and we'll be finishing with this declaration of recognition. And it's quite lengthy, as you may see on the notes that you have been given, and you may choose to stand with us as we read this. You might like to join in with us. It's up to you. A declaration of recognition. So let's stand together as we respond to the many things that we have heard today. And Lara and I are going to be reading one stanza at a time. A declaration of recognition. We gather at the place where our shared history began, Kamay Botany Bay. Though we speak of untold loss and grief, yet also we are filled with gratitude for what we have found in each other.
We see the many fair-minded people who live on all these lands. We see First Nations people who have generously shown love and forgiveness. We see later Australians who, seeing truth, labour to make wrong things right.
And yet we know that the heart of our nation is disturbed. At the heart of our nation there lies a profound injustice and a deep divide. It is a divide between descendants of those who were here and those who came.
First Nations, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people became oppressed on our first day of shared history. An armed attack was launched against them. Tall ships came from the sea, and other people overran country.
Belonging to country, First Peoples were dispossessed of their homelands. Elders looked and saw, old people displaced, no place of belonging. They looked and saw, language forbidden, culture, identity, all lost. Young lives broken by intergenerational trauma, lives over before they began.
The time has come to recognise the truth about European arrival in this land. The voice of First Peoples must be heard, and the voice of all people of goodwill heard with them.
With this declaration of recognition, we enter the truth space together. We declare that at this place we recognise the truth, the stains on our past.
We publicly reject and strongly condemn these colonising actions. They are not acceptable to us. They were not done in our name.
We celebrate a truth that binds us together, a truth of our common humanity. We commit to walking together in our resolve to making wrong things right.
This brings us almost to the conclusion of our time together. We would like to thank you for joining us. Some of you have come from far, far away, and thank you for that. We have, of course, we would love for you to share lunch together. Some of you might have brought some lunch. If you haven't, we have some sausage sandwiches available. They're not from Bunnings, but they're almost as good. And we have some water over there and some apples and stuff. So feel free to just join those. The sound and tech people would ask if you don't walk out those doors, because someone will trip over some of their wires if you do. So if you go out this way or that way, that would be great, just around that way. But I'd like to ask Lindsay to come up and to share some words at the conclusion of our time.
You are the joy of my life. I'll say it again. It's worth repeating. You are the joy of my life. I have loved this journey together with you. Tomorrow morning, arising from today, there may be reflections on our heart that are connected with today, or are issues deeply important to us that in a setting that is not so much structured like today, but much more informal, we will gather together, those who would like to do so, here at this site tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock for a few hours. It's called a yarning circle. My wife Anne and I will be here. Some others from the team will be here. If there are any here who would like to be a part of the yarning circle, we'll call it a yarn up, if you will. That's at 10 o'clock tomorrow. This moment, this occasion, is being live streamed on YouTube, and should you know people, or even for yourself, want to view today's proceedings on YouTube, that channel is available for the next little while. Some thank yous and appreciation. And I'm starting at the start. Heartfelt gratitude to the First Nations people from whichever nation or homeland you come from. Heartfelt gratitude for the authority that you gave to us to bring this day together. You have always been in charge of this truth-telling, the recognition way journey. There has never been any significant decision made to go forward unless first we all sat together and you gave it your authority. And so it is no accident that I take this moment in terms of offering gratitude to the people who are deserving of thanks, that I place the First Nations people first. Secondly, the National Parks and Wildlife Service, they have been magnificent. They've been loving, gentle, accommodating, kind, helpful. They could not have done more over the last year or so to do everything that they could to help bring this day to fruition. Finally, almost finally, the National Active Recognition Team. Wow. Without you, I would be nowhere in this journey. The support, the dedication, the willingness to be on the job, the willingness from right around Australia, because this team is located all around Australia. The Sydney team and the Canberra team particularly have been right on the job. About 20 or 30 people have put their oar in the water in one way or another to bring this day to fruition. And our heartfelt gratitude to you. One more call. Auntie Barbara mentioned my wife Anne. Anne was born 12 miles out of London by the Thames River. In her late teens, she came to this land. And in the fullness of time, we met. I need you all to know that without Anne, her love, her constant support, all that she has offered for 26 years in the way of unstinting commitment, I am here to declare Anne McDowell the real hero of the recognition story. Would you give her a hand? You've all earned a well-earned break, and so now we can leave this moment with all the savouring of it that it means for so many of us, and we can go and enjoy lunch. If you, as Rod has told us, if you brought some lunch with you, wonderful. Enjoy the grounds, enjoy lunch here. If you would like a top-up or have brought nothing with you, please do enjoy the sausage sizzle. Thank you all for coming. God bless you. Bye.
When tears are in your eyes, I will dry them all. I'm on your side. When time gets rough and friends just can't be found, like a bridge over troubled water, I will lay. So hard, I will comfort you. I'll take